Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning.
Why are you laughing? Because I couldn't press the right button, could I, to make it start.
Good morning, Andrew.
We're after a good start, aren't we? My knee was in the way. The waves couldn't get to the thing. Goodbye, Mr Grainger.
Yes.
Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
Colours galore.
Yeah, oh God, yeah. I didn't see who the designer was on this one, but
well, it's not the designer; it's the graphics people. The titles are rendered in sort of light blue, aren't we? Aren't they? Mr Humphries is selling a bloke a long red nightshirt coat thing.
Yeah, he says it's a nightshirt. It looks like a coat.
Well,
it's very red.
Mrs Slocum's hair is very purple.
It's very purple.
There are orange and green pants on display
in the background,
and the drawers at the front have got all black
loads of different
colours as well.
Yeah. Somebody's gone mad with colours.
A lady's been buying a corset off of Mrs Slocum, and she hopes it will keep her finger under control.
We're doing well today.
Her figure,
yes,
and because it was made of whalebone, Mrs Slocum points out it was strong enough to keep the whale's figure under control.
Poor whale. They don't make it out of whalebone anymore. No. It's all out of plastic.
Okay.
Not that anybody wears.
Mrs Axelby's been down the Pally to dance with Mrs Slocum.
She has.
And they put their diamante cocktail frocks on, which are short and show off their legs.
Yes, because they have good legs, apparently.
Mrs Axelby's given up football, though, since they put her in jail and she has trouble with her bunions. So she had her flat sandals on.
She had open-toed sandals,
And they were a load of funny-looking fellas, and they took an hour to look them over, and in the end they ended up dancing with each other.
And they took it in turns to lead.
So that nobody talked.
Yes.
But the bloke is told that the nightshirt will ride up with wear. And then Mr Humphries has been thinking about John Curry ice skating, hasn't he? So he's had some lessons with the lady who says he was born with it. But she's making sure he's developing in the right way.
Yes, but he might have left it a bit late.
Yeah, but he tried it solo. To I did it my way.
Yes.
And ended up going backwards at 50 miles
on the coconut matting into the men's changing room. But he made some new friends.
Yeah. He has an adventurous life.
He does have an adventurous life, yes.
But yeah, Grainger tells them to stop gossiping.
Yes.
And he's in a mood, isn't he?
He is in a mood, yes.
Yeah. Apparently it's bra week next week, and he's going to lose the centre display.
And he hates losing the centre display stand.
Yeah. Mrs Slocum's now selling some tights, which apparently have a low gusset. But
they'll ride up with wear.
Yeah, and she's got the golden touch this week.
She has.
Because the ladies are doing
quite well.
Mr Grainger's not doing so well there.
No.
He insists on taking all the sales himself.
And then mucks them up.
And frequently fails to complete. But yeah, he's been to see Mr Rumbold about the sort of centre display.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't want Mrs Slocum taking it over again.
No.
Mr Harmon comes in and he's going to change. He offers to change it now.
Yes.
But Captain Peacock says it's not the right time. But in 5 minutes he's going to see Queen's Park Rangers.
Yes.
Yeah. So what day is this?
It must be a Saturday.
Yeah. Okay. A letter arrives from Mr Rumbold. Mr Grainger's lost another customer in the meantime. He says that they've got no patience.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. And he's in a sort of foul mode. He throws the trouser that he'd been looking for at Mr Humphries. Mr Humphries doesn't like him being treated that way.
No.
Mr Grainger says, as far as I'm concerned, you can throw them out of the window. But then Mr Humphries passes them on to Mr Lucas.
Yes.
And he doesn't like that either.
No.
And Mr Humphries says he's got to be careful or he'll get his dander up. Mr Grainger hears that Mr Rumbold's final decision is to
support Captain Peacock.
So his appeal is disallowed.
Yes.
So he tears up the letter and stamps on it.
Yes.
So cut to Mr Rumbold and young Mr Grace. Young Mr Grace tells him to deal with it himself. Because old people can get a bit grumpy. And he tells him to go and boil his head.
He does.
Yeah, it's only a short scene with young Mr Grace.
He didn't get much this week. No.
So yeah, they're all to go into a meeting with Mr Rumbold except Mr Grainger.
Yes.
And they keep going, is it about...
Yeah.
nodding at Mr Grainger. But Mr Grainger's not to leave the store. So he sits on a chair.
He says he will leave the store, but he doesn't want to leave the store. He looks really sad then.
Yeah.
I think he suddenly realised that, he's brought it upon himself.
But they start discussing him, and Mrs Slocum says, men... No, is it Mrs Slocum or Miss Brum says men go off quicker than women?
Mrs Slocum, yeah.
Maybe he's going soft in the head and he should have retired, years ago. Mr Humphreys says he held his tape measure upside down with a boy, didn't he? And
gave him a 38 inside leg.
Yeah, and he can't operate the till right because his hands are shaking. And they say about faithful old horses, should he be put out to grass, or Mr Lucas suggests the knacker's yard.
Yes.
So everybody sort of says if he is to go, can Mr Humphreys replace him? And can Mr Lucas replace
Mr Humphreys?
Captain Peacock is not sure, saying that Mr Lucas probably isn't ready to, because you need experience to occupy the middle position, which Mr Humphreys agrees with. But Mr Lucas says about Alexander the Great, he was young and conquered the world, but Mr Humphreys says he couldn't take an inside leg though, could he? So then they sort of picture his final lift journey down to the basement, and Mr Lucas sort of comes up with all this imagery, proving that he's not ready for the position because he's being silly. They reckon the order to leave should come from young Mr Grace. Mr Harmon's been listening at the door, and the good news is he could hear every word they said, and the bad news is he could hear every word they said. Every word they said. They all wanted you to go, he says to Mr Grainger. They wanted all to give you the sack except Mr Lucas. Mr Grainger goes, oh dear boy. He's quite pleased with that. Then when he hears he wanted to be sent to the knacker's yard, then he's not so happy. But apparently Mrs Grainger's been upset recently because Mrs Dale's diary went off the air. And that was 20 years ago. I'll have to check that. So yeah, Mr Harmon says he should choose the honourable way out, and Mr Grainger thinks suicide at first. No, just resign, write a letter. So he starts to write a letter. And that's nicely shot. As Mr Harmon goes and turns the lights out.
Apart from one spotlight.
Apart from one pool of light that's on.
Mr Grainger.
Mr Grainger sat on his chair, writing his letter. The camera starts to pull back. And he says, dear Mr Grace, being of sound mind. The camera draws back and back, and there's echo on sort of the voiceover. Then we cut to next week. And they're wondering if he's going to come in. Mrs Slocum's hair is still purple.
It's still purple,
so she doesn't change it over the weekend.
No, and it's all filmed at the same time.
Yeah. But they're saying how he made his own bed. And, but yeah, they're wondering what he's going to be like in the 2 weeks notice period that he's got to work. Should they get him a farewell present? Captain Peacock says that Mr Harmon reported their conversation. How does he know? Who told him?
I don't know.
Because Mr Harmon left.
He did.
So, don't know.
Perhaps it's in the letter.
But Mr Grainger comes in.
Excuse me.
He's happier now, and he apologises for being rude. He does all this will you forgive me stuff.
Yes.
Mr Humphreys is overcome, and everyone is stunned. And they think it's the sort of things that saints would do.
Yes.
Like he had some sort of religious experience. Because Mrs Slocum recalls St Joan having faggots lit under her feet. But yeah, so they asked Mr Grainger, did you have a deep religious experience? And he says, no, I won the pools. And he had 8 draws. And he hasn't claimed yet. He did win once before on the pools in 1936 when he won £22, 15 and 6pence.
Yes.
Which in 1936 is a lot of money.
It is quite a lot of money, yes.
So, if you think that allowing for inflation, maybe you could get £50 by now. But it turns out the winner last week got £500,000.
Yes.
So glass of water for Mr Grainger job, as he at this news. Rumbold and Peacock discuss it, and he didn't do the box for no publicity. So there's going to be pictures of him shaking hands with Bruce Forsyth, and then the news could get out. About how they were going to let go of him. But yeah, Mr. Humphrey's nerves are in shreds, and his hands are shaking.
Yes.
But his right hand's shaking more because he's right-handed.
Yes. Yes.
And he has to take the phone call from the pools. He can hardly keep the phone hold, can he? Although he got 8 drawers, they were not all in the same column, were they?
So he doesn't get.
So he didn't win £400,000. He actually won nothing at all.
Yes.
So who's going to tell him? And they vote that it should be Mr. Humphreys to do it. Mr. Grainger comes in, having bought presents for them all, including perfume for Miss Brahms, a shaver for Mr. Lucas, a silver holder for Captain Peacock's carnation, a hairdryer with 3 settings for Mr. Humphreys,
a diamante cat collar for Mrs. Slocum's pussy.
Yes. So yeah, Mrs. Slocum's pussy is going to be wearing jewellery. So yeah, what's that say?
I don't know. You do this every week.
But he goes off to see Mr. Rumbold, and Mrs. Slocum says, "Such a fine man." And they think maybe they should tell him he's won £50 and have a whip round.
Yeah.
And send a postal order, which has to come from Liverpool, of course.
Get their Liverpool branch to send a postal order.
And I just wrote, what Liverpool branch?
They've got a Liverpool branch.
I had always assumed that Grace Brothers was one store. I didn't realise they had branches up and down the land.
Well, maybe just in Liverpool.
And Australia.
Yeah.
But wow, so it's a bigger concern than you might think, actually.
Yeah. Well, for this one particular story.
Yeah. Mr. Rumbold's got a silver spoon, but Mr. Grainger still wants to go, and Mrs. Grainger fancies a world cruise.
Yes.
Mr. Harmon comes in, having nicked the letter from young Mr. Grace's desk, and they're going to say that young Mr. Grace refuses the resignation. Then a stretcher is brought in.
Brought through, because Mr. Humphreys
with a figure on it
to tell Mr. Grainger. But they said do it outside Mr. Rumbold's office because there's a sofa for him to collapse onto. Should you so need to.
In comes 2 burly chaps holding somebody on a stretcher, and they think it's Mr. Grainger, but it's actually Mr. Humphreys.
Yes.
Because he sort of
keeled over.
He felt all funny, didn't he? So Mr. Grainger comes in. He's concerned, and so he's going to stay. He reads the letter out.
Yes.
And he insults everybody. He calls young Mr. Grace a miserable old boot. Captain Peacock's a nitpicking old busybody. Mrs. Slocum's a frustrated old cow. And Mr. Humphreys... Oh, I did go too far. Mr. Humphreys reads the letter, tears it up and stamps on it.
Yes.
And that's the end of the episode.
It is. And it's a really nice episode for Mr. Grainger.
Yeah.
And bearing in mind that there's not many more episodes
to go
with Mr. Grainger, and it's quite a nice sort of almost farewell.
Yeah, this is, of the Mr. Grainger episodes, this is a nice one because it's the last one that sort of concentrates on him, I think.
Yes,
really.
I mean he's in at least one more, isn't he?
Yeah. But what if he had won the pools? What would Mr. Grainger do? You think?
I don't know. Yeah. Don't know. Enjoy it.
Would it change him?
Possibly.
Yeah. I don't know. But yeah, quite a fun one.
Yeah.
And as you say, not many more to go.
No.
Is it one more and a Christmas special?
No, there's no Christmas special in this one because it was shown in the summer.
Oh, right, okay.
So one more episode to go, and then I think that's it.
All right, we shall see then.
Yes.
Okay, well, we'll say ta-ra and see you again.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hope I can press the button this time. Oh, yes.